The most dangerous sentence in this war was not about the Strait of Hormuz. It was this: no port in the region will be safe. Once you hear that sentence correctly, the whole picture changes. Because that is not just a military threat, that is a message aimed at every skyline, every refinery, every tanker terminal, every desalination plant, every insurance desk, every ruling palace on the Gulf. It is a message to Dubai, to Abu Dhabi, to Doha, to Kuwait City, to Ras Tanura. And the part that should make everyone stop is not only that Iran said it, it is that the United States, as of that moment, did not answer it directly. That silence matters. Because when a war starts with one choke point and then one side says, no port anywhere in the region will be safe, you are no longer talking about one blockade. You are talking about the possible conversion of the entire Gulf into a pressure zone. And once that happens, the countries that spent weeks trying not to become the battlefield suddenly become the battlefield. That is what I want to walk through today. I think a lot of the coverage is missing the point because it is treating three things as separate stories. They are not separate. They are the same story. First, Iran escalated its language from Hormuz to every Gulf port. Second, America chose not to answer that escalation directly in public. Third, Iran only feels safe enough to do that because it believes it can survive the consequences. And the reason it believes that is not mystery, not faith, not bravado. It is a system, and that system has a Chinese backbone. So let us begin with the sentence itself. Security in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman is either for everyone or for no one. No port in the region will be safe. People heard that and thought, okay, Iran is threatening America again. America already knows Iran can fire missiles, launch drones, use mines, move fast attack craft, and turn maritime traffic into a cost problem. Washington has been living inside that reality for weeks. That part is not new. The audience for this statement was the Gulf. Iran was speaking over Washington and into the ears of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and everyone whose economy depends on normal shipping, normal insurance, normal tankers, normal desalination, normal investor confidence, normal port activity. Iran was saying something very precise. If America continues this blockade, we can make it your problem too. That is a very different kind of threat. If you threaten Washington, Washington can absorb it politically. If you threaten the Gulf states with burning terminals, hit tankers, interrupted exports, damaged desalination plants, and frighten capital, you are threatening countries whose entire model depends on the opposite of chaos. Their whole system is built on the promise that money, energy, and shipping can move through a stable, protected environment. Iran is targeting that promise, and here's why the message lands. Saudi Arabia did not start this war directly. The UAE did not start it directly. Qatar has American bases, yes. But it has also spent this conflict trying not to get dragged into the center of it. These states have spent weeks hoping this stays limited. They wanted Iran under pressure without the Gulf itself turning into a live operational map. They wanted the danger to remain somewhere else. Now Iran is saying there is no somewhere else. If the blockade continues, the price of that choice may be paid in your waters, not just in ours. That is why this is not just escalation. It is wedge politics by military means. Iran is trying to split America from the Gulf states by making those states fear the continuation of American policy more than they fear Iranian rhetoric. And when you look at the response coming out of the region, you can see that the wedge is landing. The reporting in the reference material makes clear that Saudi Arabia is already pressing Washington to abandon the blockade and return to negotiations because Riyadh fears that the conflict could expand to other shipping lanes and critical facilities. Think about that. The country America claims to be protecting is telling America that America's current move is making the danger worse. That is not a side note. That is the strategic center of the moment. Now, let me explain why Iran's threat is credible even after 46 days of war, because that is the next mistake people make. They hear a threat like this and assume credibility depends on aircraft carriers, giant fleets, or some dramatic show of overwhelming force. It does not. To make a port unsafe, you do not need to conquer the Gulf. You need the ability to create repeated uncertainty. A fast boat, a sea mine, a missile, a drone, a hit on a tanker, a fire at a loading point, a strike near a refinery, a threat against a desalination plant. A short interruption can be enough because the damage is not only physical, it is financial, psychological, and systemic. Tankers do not need to sink by the dozens for the system to seize. Insurance rates spike first, routes change, delays multiply, traders panic, governments start making private calls, investors begin asking which facility is next. The economy reacts before the battlefield fully does. And Iran still has the exact tools needed to create that kind of disruption. Even Trump, while trying to project dominance, admitted that Iran still has fast attack ships. That alone tells you the idea of total elimination is fantasy. And Iran's own senior military figures are not talking like a force that has exhausted its options. They are talking about untouched levers. That phrase matters. Untouched levers means held back capacity. It means Iran is telling the region, do not assume what you have seen is everything we can do. And then there's the second board, the Red Sea. If this stays only in Hormuz, the damage is already severe. If it spreads to the Bab, El Mandeb through Yemen, then you are looking at simultaneous pressure on two critical maritime choke points, one in the Gulf, one at the southern gate of the Red Sea. At that point, this is no longer a dispute over a strait. It becomes a wider assault on the functioning of seaborne trade itself. And that is exactly why Iran phrased the threat the way it did. No port in the region will be safe. Not one ship lane, not one terminal, not one coastline. The message is that the map can widen. Now let me turn to America. Silence. Because I think a lot of people are reading that silence too lazily. The silence is not indifference. It is not that Washington did not hear the threat. It heard it. The silence is not confusion either. America understands perfectly well what Iran is signaling. The silence is a problem of timing and strategic exposure. Right now, America is trying to do several things at once. It is running a blockade. It is managing a fragile ceasefire that expires on the 21st of April. It is working indirect channels through multiple intermediaries. It is watching China and Russia shape the edges of the conflict. It is trying to keep pressure on Iran without detonating the regional coalition it still needs. In that situation, a direct public answer to Iran's threat would box Washington in. If America says officially that any action against Gulf ports will trigger heavier escalation, then it has publicly raised the stakes at the exact moment it is supposedly trying to preserve diplomatic space. Then every Gulf capital hears that a larger confrontation may be coming. Every shipper hears it, every market hears it, every intermediary hears it, but silence has a cost. 2, because when Iran threatens every Gulf port and America says nothing specific, the Gulf states start asking the question Iran wants them to ask. If this goes bad, are we really covered? Are our ports secondary? Are our tankers expendable? Is Washington so focused on the direct contest with Tehran that it is willing to leave the rest of the Gulf in a zone of strategic ambiguity? That uncertainty is the weapon. Iran is not only trying to scare America, Iran is trying to make America look incomplete in the eyes of its own partners. And that is why the silence is so consequential. Now we get to the deeper layer. Why does Iran feel confident enough to make this move? Now, not in general. Now, after the killing, after the bombing, after the destruction, after 46 days of war, why stand up now and threaten every Gulf port? The answer is not that Iran suddenly became stronger militarily this week than it was last week. The answer is that Iran believes it can absorb the next round. That is a different kind of power, not superiority absorption, and that is where China enters the picture. Before this war, according to the reference document, Iran was exporting about 1.68 million barrels of oil. Per Dalton Y in March, during the worst of the war, that number rose to 1.84 million. In April so far, it has still been around 1.71 million. Read that again carefully. A country under direct military pressure, a country with damaged infrastructure and leadership losses, was still exporting at or above its pre-war average. That should tell you immediately that the blockade is not operating in a vacuum. Something underneath it is holding Iran up. That something is the China. Iran's sanctioned survival system, yuan payments instead of dollar payments, second-tier financial channels beyond the normal Western enforcement structure. Dark fleet tankers switching off transponders, teapot refineries willing to process sanctioned crude storage and transfer mechanisms built over years, not days. This did not appear after the war began. This was built for this moment, and because it was built for this moment, it is working in this moment. The reference material notes that more than 11 million barrels of Iranian crude have moved to China since the war began on the 28th of February. That means Iran is still getting oxygen. The blockade hurts Iran. Of course it hurts Iran. But it does not suffocate Iran fast enough to force surrender on core demands. Because China has preserved the revenue lifeline, that is the center of the system. As long as Iran can still earn, still sell, still move product, still see a path through the pain, the logic of capitulation weakens. And once capitulation weakens, escalation becomes thinkable. Now add the second Chinese layer. The reporting cited in the source says U.S. intelligence believes China is preparing to send Iran shoulder-fired anti-aircraft systems through masked channels. Whether those systems arrive tomorrow or next week, the strategic meaning is already there. Iran sees that China's role is not only economic, it may also become military in ways that are deniable, indirect, and operationally useful that matters even before any shipment lands. Because war is not only about hardware, it is about confidence. And that is the framework I want to use here. The confidence ladder, Iran is climbing a confidence ladder rung by rung. One rung, Hormuz was restricted and not fully reopened. Another rung, toll systems and selective passage arrangements kept functioning. Another rung, a Chinese tanker crossed the blockade environment without becoming the start of a direct U.S.-China confrontation. Another rung, Iranian oil revenues continued. Another rung, China kept buying. Another rung, diplomatic pressure against Iran. Never fully consolidated. Another rung, Washington's public posture and its private constraints kept diverging. You do not need total victory to climb that ladder. You only need repeated proof that the other side cannot punish you decisively enough to make your next move impossible. That is what Iran has learned. Not that it is invincible. Not that America is powerless. But that the consequences remain absorbable. And once a state concludes the next escalation is absorbable, the threshold moves. That is why the threat expanded from one strait to every port. Not because Iran's conditions suddenly improved, because Iran's confidence improved. And Chinese support is built into that confidence at multiple levels. Oil purchases are a rung. Dark fleet logistics are a rung. Possible weapons transfers are a rung. Diplomatic cover is a rung. Every time America avoids addressing China's role directly, that is another rung. Now let us ask the question that should be asked in every serious strategy room. If China is helping create the conditions under which Iran can keep escalating, what is America's strategy for China's role specifically? So far, the answer looks alarmingly thin. The blockade targets Iran. The negotiations target Iran. The public threats target Iran. But the support architecture that helps Iran resist is not purely Iranian. It is Chinese. Financial, Chinese commercial, Chinese diplomatic, and potentially Chinese military. A strategy that talks only to Tehran while leaving that wider system mostly untouched is not a full strategy. It is a partial strategy against one node in a multi-node network. And that is why this war keeps producing the same surprise for people who are looking only at bombs and maps. They keep asking, why has Iran not broken? Because Iran is not standing there alone, not in the way people imagine. It has a support structure that was designed to keep it alive under pressure. And wars are often decided not by which side suffers less in the abstract, but by which side preserves a functioning system under punishment. China has helped preserve that system. Now let me tell you what I think the next few days mean. The ceasefire expires on the 21st of April. That leaves only a small window if America now answers Iran's Gulf. Wide threat with a formal military warning. Then Washington is signaling that it is prepared to bet on coercion over de-escalation. That would tell the Gulf states to brace for a harder confrontation. If America stays publicly restrained while pushing private channels through intermediaries, then Washington is telling you it still wants a diplomatic off-ramp and fears what a wider Gulf confrontation would cost. And if America starts speaking about China's role directly, not vaguely, not with half-believed tariff threats, but directly, then you are watching the conflict become what it already is beneath the surface. Not only a U.S.-Iran contest, but a wider contest over whether Iran is Chinese. Backed resilience can outlast American pressure. I do not think the headline today was really Iran's statement. That was the visible event. The real story was the invisible structure behind it. The dark fleet, the yuan channels, the continued purchases, the possible weapons pipeline, the diplomatic shielding. That is the machine that made the threat possible. And systems like that do not announce themselves with dramatic speeches. They simply keep working until one day everyone realizes the war they thought was being fought on one level was actually being sustained on another. So when Iran says no port in the region will be safe, do not hear only a threat. Hear a test of Gulf nerves, a test of American coalition management, a test of whether Washington can still reassure its partners while carrying on a blockade and chasing diplomacy at the same time. And above all, hear the sound of a system becoming visible. Because what became visible this morning was not just Iranian defiance. It was the architecture that lets Iran stay defiant. And that architecture, more than any individual threat, is what should worry Washington. Because once a war reveals the system keeping your opponent alive, the next question is brutal. Do you have a plan for the system or only for the opponent standing in front of it? If the answer is only the opponent, then the war gets longer, the costs spread wider, and the people who thought they could stay outside, it discovered that the map has moved and the danger has reached their coast. That is where we are now. Not at the edge of a local maritime dispute, at the edge of a much bigger question. Can America force a change in Iranian behavior while China keeps making sure Iran never runs out of room to resist? That is the real problem. And until that problem is answered, every silence in Washington will be heard much louder in the Gulf than any speech.